The door closed with a sound that seemed to echo for all eternity. Layla heard the lock slide shut, heavy and final, and the silence that followed was even worse than any scream. She stood there, in the center of a room she did not know, facing a man she had barely looked at during the ceremony. The veil still brushed her shoulders, but now it felt as heavy as iron. The ends of the fabric grazed her bare skin, and each touch was a reminder. You were delivered. You were sold. You do not belong to yourself anymore. Khalid al-Rashid was not a man who hesitated. His entire life had been built upon swift decisions, calculated moves, orders no one questioned. He signed multi-million-dollar contracts without blinking. He commanded boards with a firm voice. He faced political rivals without flinching. But there, in that vast room with silk curtains lightly billowing in the desert wind, he felt something strange. Her breathing was too audible, short, trapped, like a cornered animal's, and it disturbed him in a way he could not name. Layla couldn't move her feet. The heavy dress pinned her to the floor like roots she herself had allowed to grow. Each layer of embroidered fabric had cost a fortune. Every hand-sewn gem had taken weeks. Yet there, under the weight of so much forced beauty, all she felt was imprisonment. She remembered the moment her father signed the papers without looking at her, the pen scraping across the paper, his satisfied smile as he greeted the men of the al-Rashid family, the handshake, the deal concluded, as if she were merchandise of certified quality, approved for export. She remembered her mother adjusting the folds of her dress with trembling hands, trembling not with emotion but with relief. Relief at having fulfilled her role, at having handed over her daughter on time, at having secured the family's future with a marriage that would raise the Hassan family name to a level they would never have reached alone. Her mother had whispered just one thing before leaving the room where Layla was getting ready for the ceremony. Be grateful. He could have chosen anyone. She remembered Amira crying behind the bedroom door, whispering that she didn't want her sister to leave. The 16-year-old girl who still believed in fairy tales, who still thought love was a choice. Layla had promised that everything would be all right, that she would come back, to visit, that she would write letters. But now, there, with the door locked and Khalid's body blocking the only exit, she was no longer certain of anything, not even whether she would ever again be the same person who had embraced her sister that morning. Khalid took a step toward her. The sound of his shoe's sole against the marble echoed like distant thunder. Layla recoiled. It was not a thought-out movement. It wasn't calculated defiance. It was pure instinct. Her body reacted before her mind could intervene. Her legs moved on their own, putting another span of distance between her and him. And when she realized what she had done, terror crashed down like molten lead. To back away from a husband on the wedding night was not just disrespect. It was an insult to tradition, to honor, to everything that upheld that world of absolute but unwritten rules. Khalid stopped. His eyes narrowed, but not with anger, with surprise. He was used to women who lowered their gaze before he even entered the room. Women who waited in silence, who accepted their fate as one accepts rain in the desert. Inevitable, necessary, sometimes cruel, but always part of the natural order. His mother had been like that. His sisters were like that. The women of the harem were like that. Elegant ghosts gliding through corridors without noise, without troubling anyone, without truly existing. But Layla looked him in the eye. Only for a second, maybe two, but it was long enough for him to see. Fear. Not the dutiful fear expected of her, that ceremonial fear accompanied by bows and graceful submission. No, it was real fear, the kind that makes your stomach turn and your heart pound against your ribs as though it wants to flee the cage of your body. The kind of fear he had once seen in the eyes of a wild horse being broken. The kind of fear that comes before the breaking. He slowly raised his hand only to touch the veil covering part of her face. It was the expected gesture, the first of many, the symbol of a beginning. Tradition said the husband should remove the veil with his own hands on the first night, revealing the bride's face as if unwrapping a gift. But when his fingers drew near, Layla squeezed her eyes shut so tight that wrinkles formed around them. Her lips pressed together until they turned white. Her jaw clenched. And it was at that moment, in that small and involuntary gesture, that something inside her broke. She couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't pretend everything was fine. She couldn't give up her body as if handing over a signed document. She couldn't lie on that bed and let him do what everyone expected him to do while she simply endured and was grateful that it wasn't worse. Not like this. Not in silence. Not like a lamb walking to the altar without questioning the reason for the sacrifice. Her voice came out trembling, almost a whisper, but firm enough to cut through the thick air of the room. I would rather be hated for telling the truth than loved for keeping silent. Khalid froze. His hand stopped in midair, just inches from her face. His fingers still outstretched, but now with no purpose. He blinked once, slowly, as if unsure whether he had heard correctly or if his mind was playing tricks on him. Layla opened her eyes. She met his, and she continued, not knowing where the words were coming from, just feeling that if she stopped now, she would never have the courage again, that this was her only chance, the only sliver of light before darkness closed in completely. A love born of fear cannot honor God, nor tradition, nor the name of Al-Rashid. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the heavy silence of expectation, that silence laden with inevitability. It was the silence of shock, of the impossible happening before one's eyes, of the world stopping for a moment because something out of order had just happened, and no one, not even the heavens, knew how to react. No woman had ever said this to Khalid. No woman in his life had dared to return him to the condition of a human, of a man who could make mistakes, a person who needed to choose and not just fulfill ancestral protocols. His mother had never raised her voice. When his father shouted, she lowered her head. When he demanded, she obeyed. When he forgot about her existence for days, she waited in silence until he noticed her again. His sisters married in the same way. They smiled in the photos, waved goodbye, and disappeared into houses that weren't theirs, to serve men they hadn't chosen. The foreign suitors who had tried to win him over in recent years saw him as a trophy, not as a person. They wanted the title, the palace, the influence, the money. But Layla, the shy girl who had crossed the ceremonial hall with steps far too small, who had trembled throughout the entire ritual, who had kept her eyes on the ground as etiquette dictated, was now there, returning to him something he hadn't known he had lost. Awareness, the idea that this was a choice, that he could choose, that tradition was not an immutable divine law, but a human construct that humans could question. Khalid recoiled. It wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't a diplomatic strategy. It was as if his body understood before his mind did. He took 2 steps back, then another, until his back touched the cold wall covered in gilded arabesques. And there he stayed, looking at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, as if every other time he had seen her that day had been mere projections, fantasies, illusions, and now, finally, the real person stood before him. Layla opened her eyes slowly. She expected fury. She expected violence. She expected to be dragged by her hair, silenced with a slap, punished so severely that she would never dare again. But Khalid only stared at her, and on his face was something she couldn't decipher. Confusion, or maybe doubt, or perhaps, just perhaps, recognition, as if he were seeing something of himself reflected in her eyes. Her chest rose and fell far too quickly. Her hands trembled so much she had to lace her fingers together to hide it, squeezing tightly until she felt pain in her bones. But she did not lower her gaze. If she was to be destroyed by those words, let it be with her eyes open. Let them at least see that she did not bow, that she did not die on her knees. He turned his face to the side, breaking eye contact, as if he could no longer bear the weight of her gaze. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then, without a word, he walked to the door. Each step sounded far too loud in the silence. He unlocked it with a sudden movement that made the metal creak. He flung the door open with force and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft sound, almost gentle, so different from the crash she had expected, so different from everything. Layla remained there, alone in the huge room, the veil still on her shoulders and her heart racing. Her legs gave out and she sat down on the edge of the bed, too weak to nothing more. The mattress sank under the weight of the dress. Her hands gripped the embroidered fabric until her knuckles turned white. Her breathing began to come in short, shuddering gasps. But she didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there breathing, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to understand whether she had saved herself or doomed herself. Outside, the desert wind howled against the high windows. The The city lights shone in the distance, indifferent to the drama unfolding within that room, indifferent to the silent revolution that had just begun. And inside her, for the first time in her life, a truth took hold with cutting clarity, sharp as a blade in the dark. I didn't need to be loved. I needed to be seen. Layla didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if Khalid would return with guards, with her family, with punishment decreed by ancient laws she barely even knew. She didn't know if the marriage would be annulled, if she would be sent back in disgrace, if her sister would pay the price for her reckless courage. She didn't know whether she would wake in the morning as a wife or as a prisoner. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she hadn't betrayed herself. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to endure whatever came next. But she still didn't know the price she would pay for that courage. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the curtains and found Layla still sitting at the edge of the bed. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Khalid's face frozen in that impossible moment. Every time sleep threatened to come, her whole body shuddered as if bracing for the door to open at any moment. But the door had stayed shut all night. She looked down at her hands. They were still trembling slightly. The wedding dress was crumpled, stained with sweat in the places where the fabric had clung to her skin. The veil had slipped to the floor sometime in the early hours. Layla picked it up carefully, folded it slowly, and set it on the dresser like someone burying something already dead. She remembered the first time she saw Tariq. No, it wasn't Tariq. It was Khalid. The names overlapped for an instant, and she had to take a deep breath to reorganize her tired mind. Tariq was the name she had whispered to herself in secret at 15, the neighbor's son who studied engineering. She sometimes smiled at her when no one was looking. Once, she dropped a book near her just to have an excuse to speak. Layla had kept that moment as a treasure. She had imagined that maybe, just maybe, she could have a choice, that maybe her father would allow it. But Tariq married a cousin 6 months later. Arranged marriage. And Layla understood even at 15 that choice was a luxury of other worlds. She first saw Khalid 3 months ago, not in person, only in photos her father brought home. Photos printed on expensive paper, his face serious, looking at the camera with that expression powerful men always have. Control, distance, ownership of everything around him. Her father had knocked on her bedroom door that night. He entered without waiting for an answer. Threw the photos onto the bed where she was reading. "You have been chosen. It is an honor. Do not disappoint the family." Layla picked up the photos with hands that were already starting to tremble. She looked at Khalid's face, tried to imagine that man smiling. She couldn't. Tried to imagine him talking to her. She couldn't. Tried to imagine him being kind. She couldn't. But her father was already leaving. The decision had already been made. The agreement was already sealed. She was just the last to know. In the days that followed, Layla tried to ask questions, tried to understand, tried to find out who the man was with whom she would spend the rest of her life. Her mother would look away whenever she started a sentence. Her father would leave the room. Amira cried in hiding, but not out of romance. She cried because she knew what it meant. She knew her sister was being given away like a late payment. Layla remembered the conversation with Aunt Samira a week before the wedding. The woman had been assigned to prepare her, to explain her duties, to teach her what was expected of a wife on her wedding night. Her aunt spoke in a low, almost embarrassed voice. She didn't look Layla in the eye even once. She just listed instructions as if reading a recipe. Don't resist, don't complain, don't show pain, smile when it's over. Say thank you, Layla asked in a small voice. And if I don't want to? The silence that followed was answer enough. Her aunt stood up, smoothed her skirt, and said only, "None of us wanted to. But we all survived." Survived. The word echoed in Layla's mind for days. Not live, not love, not be happy, just survive. As if marriage were war and the only goal was simply not to die in the process. Now sitting in that enormous room, Layla noticed the signs she had ignored. The silence of the women during the engagement dinner. The way Khalid's mother didn't smile even once, only nodded and disappeared. The way the palace maids looked at her with something that resembled pity. The way no one, absolutely no one, asked how she felt. Because it didn't matter how she felt. She was the piece that completed the deal. The seal on the contract. The bridge between two families who wanted power. Khalid got a wife of good lineage. A woman who would bring prestige without demanding much. The Hassan family gained protection, influence, money, access to circles they would never reach on their own. Everyone gained something, except Layla. She remembered the moment she signed the papers. The clerk explained each clause in a monotone voice. She only heard half of it. Something about obedience, something about marital duties, something about children. When the time came to sign, her hand shook so much that the first letter came out crooked. Her father grabbed her wrist, squeezed it, not with affection, with warning. She signed, and at that moment, she stopped belonging to herself. Layla got up from the bed and walked to the window. She pulled the curtain slowly. The light poured in like an avalanche, making her eyes sting. Down below, the palace garden stretched out in perfect geometry. Fountains, flowers that shouldn't exist in the desert but did because money could buy even impossibilities. Tall walls around it all. A beautiful prison was still a prison. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and closed her eyes. She thought of Amira, of the promise she made, of the lie she told. Everything will be all right. But how could it be all right? How could she be a good older sister when she was trapped? How could she protect the girl from suffering the same fate if she herself hadn't managed to escape? She thought of her mother, the way she had accepted her own marriage at 17, the way she had silenced her own voice over the years until there was only an echo left, the way she taught her daughters to do the same, not out of cruelty, out of fear, because she genuinely believed there was no other path. She thought of her father, of the pride in his eyes as he announced the arrangement, of the firm handshake with Khalid's men, of the satisfied smile. He didn't see a daughter. He saw an investment that had finally yielded profit. And he thought of Khalid, of his face when she spoke, of the way he withdrew, of the expression she hadn't known how to name. Was there anger there? Was there contempt? Or was there, perhaps, something even more dangerous? Doubt. Layla didn't understand why he had left. Men like him didn't leave. Men like him took what was theirs by right. Men like him didn't back down in front of their wives. But he had withdrawn. And that frightened her almost as much as if he had stayed, because now she didn't know what to expect. Someone knocked on the door. Layla jumped away from the window. Her heart raced. Her hands searched for something to hold, but found only air. The door opened slowly. It wasn't Khalid. It was an older woman, dressed in simple but elegant clothes. A servant, maybe a housekeeper. She came in carrying a tray with tea and fruit. She set it on the table without looking at Layla. Then she bowed and started to leave. Layla found her voice. Wait. The woman stopped. She didn't turn around. What's going to happen to me? Silence. Please. I need to know. At last, the woman looked at her. Her eyes were tired, far too old for the rest of her face. Eyes that had seen too much and had stopped being surprised. No one knows, the woman said in a rough voice. But if I were you, I'd stay quiet. Very quiet. And left. The door closed again. Layla stood there alone, with a tray of food she couldn't eat and a piece of advice that sounded like a death sentence. Stay quiet. It was exactly what everyone had always wanted from her. It was exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't do anymore. But now under the harsh morning light, alone in a palace that wasn't a home, married to a man she didn't know, separated from the only family she had, Layla began to understand the scale of what she had done. She hadn't saved herself. She had only postponed the inevitable. And maybe, just maybe, she had made everything much worse. 3 days passed in absolute silence. Layla remained in the room like a forgotten ghost. No one came to fetch her. No one explained anything. Meals appeared 3 times a day, brought by the same tired-eyed woman who never spoke, only set the trays down and left. The room had its own bathroom, clothes in the closet, everything a body needed to keep functioning. But no answer, no sign of what was to come. The worst part wasn't the isolation, it was the waiting. On the morning of the 4th day, the door burst open. It wasn't the silent maid. It was a tall man, dressed in formal clothes, his face marked by deep wrinkles and eyes as sharp as blades. He entered without asking permission, without even looking at her, and stopped in the middle of the room like someone inspecting faulty merchandise. "You will be presented to the council this afternoon," he said in a dry voice. "Dress appropriately. Do not speak unless you are directly asked. Do not look any man in the eye. Do not disgrace the name you now bear." Layla was seated in the armchair near the window. She didn't move. "Who are you?" The man finally looked at her. His expression was one of pure disdain. "I am Rashad, chief advisor to Al-Rashid, and you are the problem I need to solve before it turns into a scandal." He turned to leave, but Layla stood up. Her voice was steadier than she had intended. "What scandal?" Rashad stopped. His shoulders tensed. He turned his face slightly, just enough for her to see his hardened profile. "The marriage has not been consummated. That's an insult to tradition, an affront to honor. If the people find out, if other families find out, there will be consequences. Consequences for whom? For everyone, especially for you." He left before she could respond. The afternoon arrived, heavy as molten lead. 2 maids entered the room carrying clothes. They dressed Layla in silence, with mechanical movements, neither kind nor cruel, merely professional indifference. The dress was dark blue with long sleeves and a high collar. It covered every inch of skin as if her very body were an offense. They pinned her hair back so tightly it hurt. They covered it with a thin veil that left her face visible, but marked her as belonging. Married woman. Property. When they finished, Layla barely recognized herself in the mirror. They led her through the palace's endless corridors. Layla tried to memorize the way, but everything looked the same. Marble, gold, silence. Finally, they stopped in front of enormous double doors. The guards opened them. The council chamber was vast and cold. A huge table occupied the center, surrounded by men with white beards and traditional clothing. All conversation stopped when she entered. They all looked at her as if she were an insect to be classified before being crushed. Khalid was seated at the head of the table. It was the first time Layla had seen him since that day-night. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. His jaw clenched, his body as rigid as a stone statue. Rashad indicated a spot beside the door. "Stand there. Do not sit." Layla obeyed because she had no choice. She stood, hands clasped in front of her, breathing controlled while the men resumed talking as if she didn't exist. They were discussing business, trade agreements, territorial disputes, matters she didn't entirely understand but recognized the weight of. Money, power, influence, the things that kept that world turning. After nearly an hour, Rashad cleared his throat. "There is another matter that needs to be addressed." Silence fell like a blade. The marriage of Sheikh Khalid was celebrated 4 days ago. However, there has yet to be consummation. This raises questions regarding the validity of the union and the bride's willingness to fulfill her duties. Layla felt all eyes turned toward her. She felt the weight of their judgment without needing to look. She kept her head bowed as ordered, but her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear. One of the older men spoke. His voice was rough as sandpaper. "If the wife refuses, the marriage can be annulled. She must be returned to her family in disgrace. That is the law." Another agreed. The honor of Al-Rashid cannot be stained by a rebellious wife. Khalid finally raised his gaze. There was no refusal. Rashad leaned forward. "Then why the delay, my lord?" Khalid didn't answer immediately. His fingers drummed once on the table. Just once. But it was enough for Layla to notice. He was uncomfortable, perhaps even nervous. "I have my reasons," Khalid said, voice controlled. "I do not need to justify them to the council." "With all due respect, sir," Rashad continued, "this is not a personal matter. This is a matter of state. Our allied families expect an heir. The people expect continuity. Every day that passes without consummation is a day that weakens your position." Another advisor joined in. "If you do not wish for this wife, we can arrange a discreet annulment. There are other candidates, perhaps women more suitable." Layla felt the floor shift beneath her feet. More suitable, as if she were clothing that didn't fit properly, as if she could be swapped for a better model. Khalid slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "There will be no annulment." The silence that followed, he was as tense as a rope about to snap. Rashad took a deep breath. "So what's the solution, my lord?" Khalid finally looked at Layla. It was quick, just a second. But in that second, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't known how to name that first night. Now she did. It was conflict, an internal war between what he'd been taught to be and what her words had awakened. "The solution is mine to decide," Khalid said. "This meeting is over." No one moved. "I said it's over." This time the men stood up. They bowed. They left one by one. but not before casting looks at Layla. Looks that said it all. You caused this. You're the problem. You need to be fixed. When the last one left, only Khalid and Layla remained in the huge room. The guards were outside. The doors were closed. Silence returned, but now it was different, heavy with things left unsaid. Khalid stood up slowly. He walked over to the window, his back to her, looking out at the city below. "You don't know what you've done," he said without turning. "You don't know the storm you caused with those words." Layla found her voice. "I only spoke the truth. Truth doesn't matter here." He turned his face slightly, only his profile visible. "Here, order matters. Tradition, appearances. You broke all three. Then send me back. Annul the marriage. Send me away." Khalid gave a short, humorless laugh. "And condemn you and your family to ostracism? Ruin everyone's reputation? Turn your sister into a pariah no one will want? Is that what you want?" Layla felt the ground vanish beneath her once again. She hadn't thought of Amira. She hadn't thought about the consequences beyond herself. "My sister? If I send you back, everyone will know the marriage failed. They'll assume it was your fault, that you weren't worthy. Your family will be marked. Your sister will never get a decent marriage. Your father will lose all the contacts he gained through this alliance. You doomed them the moment you spoke up." The words hit like punches. Layla felt her legs weaken but didn't allow herself to fall. "So what do I do?" Khalid finally turned around fully. He looked at her truly for the first time since she'd entered the room. "You learned to survive, like all the other women did before you." Survive. The same word her aunt had used. The same sentence in disguise. For advice. Layla lifted her chin. Her voice was low but steady. "I don't just want to survive." Khalid took a step toward her, then another. He stopped just a few meters away. "Then what do you want?" She stared at him. For the second time in her life, she didn't lower her gaze before him. "I want to be seen as a person, not as an object, not as a means to an end. I want you, when you look at me, to see someone who exists beyond the role I was forced to play." Khalid was silent for so long that Layla thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "And what if I say I want that too? That I'm also tired of being just a symbol, just a title, just an expectation that walks and breathes but never truly lives?" Layla blinked. She hadn't expected that. He went on, his voice gaining weight. "Do you think I chose this life? Do you think I wanted to be born as the heir to a system that turns people into chess pieces? I was trained since childhood not to feel, not to question, simply to comply. And I complied. Until you. Until me. Until you spoke those words and made me realize I was about to do to you what they did to my mother, to my sisters, to all the women I've known. Turn you into a ghost." Silence returned. But this time it wasn't the silence of war. It was a silence of recognition, of two people trapped in different cages finally realizing the keys were held by the same jailers. Layla took a small step, then helped me understand. "Why did you leave that night?" Khalid rubbed his face, exhausted. "Because for the first time in my life I didn't know what to do. Because everything in me told me to ignore your words and just do what was expected. But something stronger told me that if I did that, I'd be killing the last part of me that still believed in anything beyond duty. And now, what are you going to do now?" He looked at her with such intensity that Layla forgot to breathe. "Now I'm going to give you a choice. A real choice, not an illusion. You can go back to your family. I'll make up a diplomatic reason. I'll protect your reputation and your sister's. I'll make sure no one harms you. Or you can stay. Not as a wife in the sense what they want, but as an ally. As someone who is also trapped in this system and wants to change it. Not overnight, not through revolution, but slowly, with small choices that will crack the walls until they finally fall." Layla felt tears burn, but she didn't let them fall. "Why would you do this for me?" Khalid smiled for the first time. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the sad smile of someone who recognizes a fellow prisoner. "Because you woke me up, and now I can't pretend I'm still asleep." Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The orange light poured in through the enormous windows and painted everything gold. For a moment, it almost felt like hope. But Layla knew hope was dangerous. She knew nothing had truly changed. The council still demanded consummation. The court still expected an heir. The people still saw the traditional marriage as something that should follow the traditional script. And she was still trapped. Even if the cage was a little bigger now, even if she had company. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. Eventually the pressure will get too high. Eventually we'll have to choose. To give in or to break completely. And if we break, there will be a price. A steep one. For both of us." Layla nodded slowly. "Then let it be steep. I've paid too much already to turn back now." Khalid reached out his hand. Not to touch her, just as a gesture. A silent pact between two prisoners planning an impossible escape. Layla looked at his hand, then at his face, and finally, slowly, she placed her hand on his. The touch was brief, formal, but it meant more than any forced consummation ever could, because it was a choice. And choice in that world was the greatest act of rebellion possible. But they did not yet know the true price they would pay for this rebellion. In the weeks that followed, the palace turned into a chessboard where every move was watched, analyzed, interpreted. Layla would wake early, before sunrise, and stand on her bedroom balcony, watching the city awaken. The lights would come on, one by one, like stars falling in reverse. The call to the first prayer would echo from the mosques. Life outside went on, indifferent to the drama unfolding within those marble walls. Khalid had established a strange routine. He hadn't returned to her room since that first night, but every morning, without fail, a white rose appeared on her breakfast tray. No note, no explanation, just the flower. On the third day, Layla realized it was a message. Silent, but clear. "I haven't forgotten you. I'm here." She began to respond in the only way she could. She would leave a different book on the small table near the door. Poetry sometimes, philosophy, other times. On the fifth day, she left a copy of Rumi open to a specific page. The verse spoke of golden cages that were still cages. When the maid came to fetch the tray, she took the book with her. The next morning, there were 2 roses. The first time they saw each other again was at a formal dinner. The enormous table seated 20 people. Layla was placed at the far end, away from Khalid, surrounded by the wives of other advisors. Women who smiled with their lips but not with their eyes, who asked polite questions laced with subtle poison. "How are you adjusting, dear? It must be hard for such a young girl. The Sheikh is a man of strong temperament, isn't he? I hope you're learning his tastes." Layla answered in a low, polite voice, never giving them ammunition. But she felt the weight of every word. She felt she was being tested, that any misstep would be used against her. At the other end of the table, Khalid ate in silence, but Layla noticed. He was looking. Not directly, never directly when others could see, but out of the corner of his eye, quick, like someone checking to make sure something precious is still there. After the dinner, when everyone stood up, Khalid walked past her. It seemed casual, seemed accidental, but as he passed, he let a small folded piece of paper slip. It fell so discreetly that only Layla noticed. She grabbed it with a swift motion, hid it in her sleeve, and kept walking as if nothing had happened. In her room, alone, she opened the paper. The handwriting was firm, masculine, hurried. Library, midnight, side door. Layla should have felt fear, should have hesitated, but she felt something else, curiosity, and something more dangerous, expectation. She waited until she heard the maid's footsteps recede, waited until the palace sank into the heavy silence of the early morning. Then she put on a simple robe over her nightgown, slipped off her shoes so she wouldn't make a sound, and left her room. The corridors were dark. Only a few torches burned at long intervals. Layla walked close to the walls, her heart beating so loud she was sure someone would hear. She passed guards dozing on their feet, past closed doors behind which other lives slept. At last, she found the library. The side door was ajar. He entered slowly. The library was enormous, 2 stories of shelves reaching all the way up to a ceiling painted with constellations. It smelled of old paper and leather. Only a single oil lamp was lit on a table at the center, and there, standing among the shadows, was Khalid. He wore simple clothes, not the formal attire he wore during the day, only a white tunic and dark pants. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his hand through it several times. He looked younger that way, more human, less a symbol and more a person. "You came," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, perhaps a relief. Layla closed the door behind her. "Why did you call me here?" Khalid walked over to the table, placed his hands on the wooden surface and stared at the lamp as if searching for words in the dancing shadows. Because during the day I am the Sheikh, I need to be what everyone expects. But at night, alone, I forget how to pretend. And I thought maybe you also needed a place where you didn't have to pretend. Layla approached slowly. She stopped on the other side of the table. The light from the lamp illuminated half her face, leaving the other half in shadow. You don't know me. How can you know what I need? I know enough. I know the look of someone who is drowning but can't scream. I've seen that look in the mirror for years. The silence that fell was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared by people who understand that some truths are too heavy for words. Layla pulled up a chair and sat down. Khalid hesitated, then did the same. They stayed there, facing each other, the lamp between them like a fragile bridge over an abyss. "Tell me about your sister," said Khalid suddenly. Layla blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because when the council threatened you with the consequences to her, I saw your face change. I saw she is your weakness, and I want to understand." Amira is 16. She is everything I should have been and never was. Beautiful, delicate, a dreamer. She still believes the world can be good. She still draws dresses and imagines weddings where the groom chooses her out of love. I was afraid that she would grow up and discover the truth, that there is no choice, that there is only obedience or destruction, and now, because of me, she might pay a price she doesn't deserve. Khalid listened without interrupt. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I have 4 sisters. 3 are married. The youngest is still here. She's 19, engaged to a man she's never seen, who lives in another country. The wedding will be in 6 months. Every time I see her, I think about how she's going to disappear, how the light in her eyes will gradually fade until there's nothing left but a body going through the motions. Why don't you stop it? I don't have the power to. Not yet. The council decides these matters. My father decided before he died. I'm Sheikh, but there are invisible chains that bind even sheikhs." Layla studied him for a long moment. "So we're both prisoners pretending to be free." Khalid smiled. It was a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, except now we have company." They talked for hours. About childhood. About dreams they had before they learned dreaming was dangerous. Khalid told her about his older brother who died in a car accident, turning him from the forgotten second son into an heir under crushing pressure. Layla told him about her mother, who had once been a painter, who hid unfinished canvases in the back of the closet like secrets she was ashamed of. They talked about books, about poetry they read in secret, about songs they couldn't admit to liking because they were too Western, too modern, too free. At some point, Khalid got up and fetched a book from the shelf. He brought it back, opened it to a marked page. "I read this when I was 16. I thought if I memorized the right words, I'd be able to understand why I felt so lost." Layla took the book. It was Khalil Gibran, the prophet, opened to the chapter on marriage. She read aloud in a low voice. "So tell me about marriage." But the poet answered, "There is no marriage without space. There is no love without freedom. Love one another, but do not make a fetter of your love." She closed the book slowly. "It's beautiful, but it's not for us, is it?" "No," said Khalid. "Not for us. Not in this world." Layla handed back the book. Their hands brushed by accident. It was brief, less than a second, but they both felt it. The temperature, the small shock of skin against skin, the sudden realization that they were alone, in the dark, with no witnesses, no rules, nothing but themselves. Khalid withdrew his hand first. He took a deep breath, looked away. "I should take you back. It's past 2 in the morning. If anyone notices you're gone, I know." But Layla didn't move. "Just stay 1 more minute." He looked at her, really looked, as if he were trying to memorize her, as if he knew these moments were too rare to be wasted. "Why?" "Because during the day I have to be the perfect wife who doesn't question. I have to lower my eyes and smile at the right moments. I have to disappear. But here, now, with you, I can exist, even if only for a minute. Even if tomorrow we go back to being strangers." "We're not strangers," Khalid said in a low voice. "Not anymore. I think we're the only person each of us truly knows." Layla felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was recognition. It was to see and be seen. It was the impossible feeling that in that huge palace full of people, she finally wasn't completely alone. They stood up at the same moment. Khalid picked up the lantern. I'll take you back, through the secret corridors. No one will see. They walked side by side through hidden passageways Layla hadn't even known existed. Passages that wound between walls, that climbed and descended narrow staircases, that led to disguised doors. In some stretches, they had to squeeze through tight spaces. Their bodies touched, shoulders, arms, by accident, always by accident, but each touch left a mark. Each casual brush was less casual than it seemed. When they reached near her room, Khalid stopped. He pointed to a door. It's there. Can you make it on your own? I can. Layla hesitated. Then she asked, will it happen again? These meetings? Khalid didn't answer right away. He looked at her with an expression that was a mixture of longing and fear. He should say no. He should be sensible. He should protect them both from what these meetings could become. But he ended up saying, yes, tomorrow night, same place. Layla nodded, turned to leave, but stopped, looked back. Khalid, yes, thank you for seeing me. He didn't answer with words, he just inclined his head. But on his face, lit by the flickering lamplight, there was something new, something that hadn't been there before, something dangerous and inevitable, something that was beginning to look like hope. Layla went back to her room, closed the door carefully, leaned her back against the wood, and finally allowed the smile to surface. Small, private, just hers. For the first time since she had arrived at that palace, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a conspirator. And conspiracy, she was discovering, was much more interesting than resignation. But neither of them knew that someone had been watching, that shadows have eyes, that secrets in palaces never remain secrets for long, and that the price of hope in that world was always paid in blood. Their nightly meetings had become a ritual. Every night at midnight, Layla would cross the silent corridors to the library, and every night Khalid would be waiting for her with the lamp lit and a new book to share. They talked about everything. About politics he pretended to fully understand, but confessed he found oppressive. About art she had never been able to study, but had always secretly loved. About the burden of carrying surnames that mattered more than their given names. In the third week, something changed. Khalid brought tea. He served her himself, a gesture unthinkable for a sheikh during the day. Layla took the cup and their hands touched again. This time neither of them pulled away immediately. They stayed like that for 2 seconds, 3, 4, until Layla lowered her gaze and Khalid let go of the cup abruptly as if he'd been burned. Sorry, he murmured. For what? I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, restless, for making this harder than it already is. Layla drank the tea slowly. She felt the warm liquid sliding down her throat. You're not making anything hard. You're making it bearable. Khalid looked at her for so long she felt heat rise up her neck. Then he looked away, as he always did when the moment grew too intense. Tell me something no one knows about you, Layla thought. I used to write poetry, stories. I wrote in notebooks I hid under the mattress. My father found them once. He burned everything. Said a woman who writes is a woman who thinks too much, and a woman who thinks too much doesn't marry well. Khalid's jaw tightened. Did you stop? For a while. Then I started again. But I learned to burn it myself before anyone else could find it. I learned that if I wanted to keep something just for myself, I had to destroy it before they could. Did you bring any notebook here? No. They didn't let me bring anything personal. Only clothes chosen by my mother and jewels chosen by yours. Khalid stood up suddenly. He left the library without explanation. Layla remained there confused, thinking she had said something wrong. But he returned 5 minutes later carrying a leather-bound notebook and a golden pen. He handed them to her. Write. Again. Write whatever you want. I won't read it. No one will read it. But don't destroy it. Keep it. Let it exist. Layla picked up the notebook with trembling hands. Why? Because if you burn your own words, they've already won. And I need to believe we still have a chance not to let them win. That night Layla wrote for the first time in months. She wrote about cages, about silence that screams, about a man who saw her when everyone else merely looked through her. She wrote until her fingers hurt, and when she finally stopped, she realized she was crying. Not out of sadness, out of relief, for finally reclaiming something she thought was lost forever. But while Layla wrote safely in her room, gathering pieces of herself, another story was unfolding in the shadows. Rashad, the advisor, was not a man to leave anomalies uninvestigated. The unconsummated marriage was a thorn in his vision of perfect order. He had started to observe, to discreetly ask the maids questions, to notice small things, how Layla seemed less afraid, how Khalid sometimes smiled when he thought no one was watching, how there were flowers on her tray every morning. He assigned 2 guards to keep watch, not officially, only to report any irregularities. And that's how he discovered the nighttime encounters. At first, Rashad thought about using the information immediately, creating scandal, accusing them of impropriety. But he was a clever man. He knew timing was everything. So he waited, gathered evidence, waited for the right moment to detonate the bomb that would destroy any possibility of change. That moment arrived the morning unexpected visitors showed up. Layla's family, her father, her 2 uncles, and Amira. Layla was in the garden when she found out. A maid came running, breathless. "Your family has arrived, my lady. The Sheikh has ordered you to prepare to receive them in the main hall in 1 hour. Layla's heart raced. Why were they there? It wasn't anticipated. It wasn't planned. Something was wrong. They dressed her in a hurry, clothes even more formal than usual. She was completely covered. When she finally descended to the hall, she saw her family sitting on velvet chairs, drinking tea they barely touched, looking around with a mixture of reverence and discomfort. Amira stood up when she saw her. She ran and hugged Layla with desperate force. "I missed you," she whispered. "So much." Layla held her sister as if she were an anchor. "Me too. But why are you here?" Their father stood up. "We were summoned. The council wants to discuss about the progress of the marriage." Layla felt her blood freeze. She looked around. Khalid was not there. Only Rashad, seated like a judge awaiting the accused. "Sit down," Rashad ordered. "We have serious matters to discuss." Everyone obeyed. Layla sat beside Amira, gripping her sister's hand tightly. Rashad started in a formal, emotionless voice. "It's been 5 weeks since the marriage was celebrated. 5 weeks without consummation. 5 weeks of accumulated dishonor. The Al-Rashid family has been patient. But patience has its limits." Layla's father swallowed hard. "Was there a problem with my daughter? Has she been disrespectful?" "Not disrespectful." Rashad smiled. "Worse. It's influence. Sheikh Khalid, ever since he married her, has displayed erratic behavior. He questions council decisions, delays appointments, and most importantly, he's been meeting with his wife in secret, at night, without witnesses, without attendance, violating all protocols." The hall fell into absolute silence. Layla felt her world collapse. They knew. They knew about the meetings, they knew about the library, they knew everything. The eldest uncle spoke in a harsh voice. Were these meetings inappropriate? Was there secret consummation? Rashad shook his head. No, and that's exactly the problem. If there had been consummation, even if improper, at least the duty would have been fulfilled. But there was nothing, only conversation, only emotional closeness that should not exist between Sheikh and wife. He treats her as an equal, as a confidant, as if her opinion matters. Layla's father flushed red. "Is my daughter causing this? Is she enchanting the Sheikh?" "Enchanting is a strong word," Rashad said. "But influencing? Yes, and that influence needs to end. Today." Amira squeezed Layla's hand tightly. She whispered softly, "What did you do?" Layla couldn't answer. She just looked at her sister and saw fear, real fear, and she understood that Rashad was not just attacking her. He was attacking any possibility for change. He was reaffirming the old order with an iron fist. Rashad continued, "The solution is simple. The wife will be isolated for a month. No contact with the Sheikh, no outings, no privileges, only time to reflect on her duties. After this period, the Sheikh will consummate the marriage as it should be done. And if there is resistance, the marriage will be annulled, and she will be returned to the family in disgrace." "No." The voice came from the entrance to the hall. Khalid was there, standing under the marble arch, dressed in full Sheikh regalia, his posture regal but his face a mask of controlled fury. "With all due respect, sir," Rashad began, "there is no respect in anything you're doing." Khalid strode in with measured steps. "How dare you summon her family without my permission? How dare you decide my wife's fate without consulting me?" Rashad stood up. "I consulted the council. Everyone agreed. This is for the good of the emirate. This is because of your fear. Khalid stopped at the center of the hall. Fear of change, fear of losing control, fear that I'll finally wake up and realize that half the traditions you defend aren't sacred. They're just convenient for keeping you in power. The silence that followed was explosive. Layla's father got up, agitated. Sheikh Khalid, I apologize for any confusion. My daughter will be disciplined. I promise. Your daughter doesn't need discipline. Khalid looked at Layla for the first time since entering. She needs respect, and I failed to give her that from the very beginning. He walked until he stood in front of Layla. He held out his hand. Stand up. Layla hesitated. She looked at Rashad, at her father, at Amira, then at Khalid. She saw determination. She saw risk. She saw choice. She placed her hand in his and rose. Khalid turned her to face everyone. This woman is my wife, not by initial choice but by destiny, and I am choosing now to honor her the way she deserves. Not as an object, not as a duty, as a person. Rashad stepped forward menacingly. You are making a grave mistake, my lord. A mistake that will cost you your throne. Then let it cost me. But I will no longer be a prisoner of a system that turns love into transaction. He looked at Layla. He truly looked at her. And in front of everyone, he said the words that changed everything. I didn't need a perfect wife. I needed someone to remind me that I'm still human. And you did that. With every conversation, with every shared silence. You woke me up, and I refused to pretend to be asleep any longer. Layla felt tears burn her eyes. They weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of recognition. Someone finally saying out loud what she had felt in silence for weeks. But Rashad was not defeated. He smiled. A cold smile that never reached his eyes. How romantic. But romance does not rule emirates. Reality does. And the reality is that you have 24 hours to properly consummate this marriage, or I'll take this situation to the full council. And there, my lord, you do not have a majority. Khalid did not back down. Then go ahead. I am not afraid of the council. Rashad turned to Layla's father. Take the youngest daughter. She will remain under the palace's protection while this matter is resolved. As collateral. No. Layla stepped forward. Amira has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it. Rashad looked at her with disdain. Every action has consequences. Every rebellion has a price. Your sister is the price. Amira began to cry. Guards entered. They grabbed the girl by the arms. Layla's father did not protest. The uncles remained silent. They only bowed their heads. Cowards, Layla spat. All of you, you hand over your own daughter, your own niece. Why? Out of fear? Out of convenience? Her father finally looked at her. With anger, with shame, with resignation. You did this. You brought this upon all of us. If only you had obeyed. If I had obeyed, I'd be dead inside. Just like you. The hand came quick. The slap struck Layla's face with such force that she stumbled to the side. Khalid moved instantly, stepping between them, but the damage was done. The mark of his fingers was already visible, red on her skin. Leave, Khalid ordered in a low, dangerous voice. All of you. Now. Layla's family left. Amira screamed, cried, begged. But she was taken all the same. To where, Layla did not know. For what purpose, she feared to find out. When they were alone, only Khalid, Layla, and Rashad, the counselor smiled victoriously. 24 hours. After that, either you give in or you lose everything. Including her. He left, the threat hanging in the air like toxic smoke. Khalid gently cupped Layla's face. He studied the mark. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry. I should have foreseen this. I should have protected you better. Layla shook her head. You couldn't have known. But I did. I've always known this world punishes those who dare to be different. Yet I still dragged you into it. No one dragged me. I chose. Every night, I chose to come to you. Every conversation, I chose to stay. You owe me nothing. Khalid pressed his forehead to hers. It was an intimate gesture. Desperate. I don't know what to do. If I yield, I lose you either way. If I resist, your sister pays. There's no victory here. Only different kinds of defeat. Layla closed her eyes. She felt his breath close. She felt the heat, the nearness, the impossibility of everything. So you choose the defeat that lets you look in the mirror, even if it costs everything, especially if it costs everything. They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity but was only seconds. Then Khalid stepped back. He looked at her with an intensity that hurt. 24 hours. I'll use every minute to find a way out, to protect you, to protect Amira. I promise. And if there's no way out, then we'll make our own, even if it's a way that destroys us. Layla nodded. She walked to the window, looked out at the city below, at the desert beyond, at the world that kept on spinning, indifferent. For the first time since she'd arrived there, she understood completely. There was no way to win by playing by their rules, because the rules were made to ensure that people like her always lost. The only way out was to break the game entirely, but breaking the game meant breaking themselves in the process, and maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. The following hours passed like a dense fog where nothing had a clear shape. Khalid disappeared into the council's chambers. Layla was escorted back to her room by silent guards who treated her like a prisoner awaiting sentence. The door locked from the outside. For the first time since her wedding night, she was truly imprisoned. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe, tried to think, but the only image that came was Amira's face being dragged away, her sister's eyes full of the terror Layla had caused. Every choice she had made, every word she had said, every moment of courage she had thought was victory, had led to this. Amira paying for her defiance. Guilt fell on her like tons of sand. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she should have just obeyed. Married in silence. Consummated without question. Erased herself like all the other women before her. At least then Amira would be safe. At least then no one else would suffer for her mistakes. But then she remembered Khalid's words on that first night in the library. If you burn your own words, they've already won. If she erased herself now, Rashad would win. The system would win. And Amira would grow up seeing that rebellion only brings pain. That questioning only brings punishment. That women who dare to dream end up destroying themselves and everyone around them. No, it couldn't be like that. Layla picked up the notebook Khalid had given her. She opened to the last written page. She reread her own words. I didn't need to be loved. I needed to be seen. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and finally understood. Being seen wasn't about Khalid. It wasn't about love. It was about existing fully, without apologizing, without shrinking, without disappearing. It was about looking in the mirror and recognizing the person reflected there. And if she gave up now, she would never recognize herself again. The decision came with razor-sharp clarity. She wouldn't yield. She wouldn't let herself be used as a chess piece. She wouldn't let Amira learn that obedience was the only way to survive. She would fight, even if she lost, even if it cost her everything. Because some battles needed to be fought not for victory, but for the simple act of resisting. The door opened hours later. It wasn't guards. It was Khalid. His face was exhausted, deep circles under his eyes, his jaw clenched. He came in and locked the door behind him. I managed something, he said bluntly. It's not perfect, it's not fair, but it's the only way out I've found. Layla stood up. What is it? I convinced 3 council members to support a motion. If we agree to consummate the marriage tonight, witnessed by a midwife who will confirm it afterward, Rashad will back off. Amira will be released. Your family will be protected. And in exchange, I get 6 months. 6 months to consolidate power, make gradual changes, prepare the ground for real reforms. And the price? Khalid looked at her, pain in his eyes. The price is your choice. It's doing exactly what they always wanted. It's turning something that should be intimate into a political performance. It's giving in. Layla felt the weight of the words. Giving in. After everything. After every moment of resistance. Going back to the beginning and doing exactly what they'd always expected of her. But then she thought of Amira. She thought of her sister growing up under the shadow of her failed rebellion. She thought of the changes Khalid might be able to make with 6 months of consolidated power. She thought of the other women who would come after. Sisters, daughters, granddaughters. Sometimes yielding a battle was the only way to win the war. She looked at Khalid, really looked at him. She saw the man she had met in the shadows of the library, the man who had given her a notebook, who had seen her when everyone else looked right through her, who had awakened from a sleep that lasted a lifetime. If I do this, she said slowly, it's not for them. It's not for the council. It's not for tradition. For Amira. For you. For all the people who can still be saved if we have time. Khalid nodded. I know. And it will be the hardest thing we've ever asked of each other. Layla took a deep breath. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Do you still see me? After this? Or will I become just another wife who gave in? Khalid closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He held her face in both hands, looked into her eyes with an intensity that burned. I see you. I saw you that first night when you had the courage to speak the truth. I saw you in every meeting at the library. I saw you when you stood up to your father. I saw you when you chose to protect your sister over your own freedom. And I will keep seeing you until my last breath. That doesn't change. It never will. The tears finally fell. Layla didn't try to hold them in. She let them flow. Let them bear witness to something breaking and being rebuilt at the same time. All right, she whispered. I'll do this. But then, when we get to 6 months, when things change, promise me one thing. Whatever you want. Promise me we'll build a world where no other woman has to choose between being seen and being safe. Where no girl has to silence her own voice to survive. Where Amira can grow up and choose her own fate. Khalid rested his forehead against hers. I promise. With every drop of power I have, with every second of the 6 months, I promise. Then kiss me. Now. Before they come. Before this becomes a performance. Kiss me because you choose to, not because you must. Khalid hesitated just for a second, then closed the distance. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent. There was no possessiveness, no sense of duty. It was just 2 prisoners finding momentary freedom in one another. It was recognition. It was choice. It was everything the system had tried to prevent. When they parted, both of them were crying. There was a knock at the door. It was time. The midwife entered, an old woman with an expressionless face. She had come to do her job, to confirm, to witness, to seal. Khalid looked at Layla one last time before everything began, whispered so softly only she heard, I see you, always. And Layla whispered back, I see you too. What happened next was mechanical, clinical, necessary but empty. The midwife waited outside the door. When it was done, she entered, confirmed, made her notes, went out to report to the council. It was done. The marriage was consummated. Tradition was satisfied. Order was restored. But Layla and Khalid knew the truth. They knew that what had happened in that room was not a victory for the system. It was a conscious sacrifice. It was a strategic choice. It was the price they paid to buy time. Time to change everything. Khalid dressed slowly. Before leaving, he turned to her. Amira will be released tomorrow morning. Her family will be informed that everything is resolved. And I'll start working immediately on the changes. Layla was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a sheet, her hair down, her face still damp. Just don't take too long. 6 months might seem like an eternity, but for changing centuries of tradition, it's almost nothing. Then let's make every day count. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. I don't regret any of it. Not the meetings, not the conversations, not waking up. Even if it had ended worse, I wouldn't regret it. Neither would I. He left. The door closed, and Layla was alone once again. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't lost. She was positioned, ready, waiting for the right moment for the next move. She picked up the notebook, wrote with a steady hand. I didn't need to be loved. I needed to be seen. And now that I've been seen, I can finally begin to see. 6 months later, the palace was a different place. Subtly, but undeniably different. Khalid had used every day as he promised. He reformed the council, replacing 2 of its more extreme members with moderate voices. He passed a law allowing women to study abroad without requiring male permission. He abolished the practice of marriages before the age of 18. They were small changes to some, monumental to others. Rashad had tried to resist, tried to rally opposition, but Khalid played the political game with a mastery no one expected. He used alliances. He used the economy. He used the very power he'd always had but never knew how to wield because he'd been asleep. Now he was awake. And awake, he was a force no one could entirely stop. Layla had found her role, not as a decorative wife, as an unofficial advisor. Khalid consulted her about everything, brought documents, asked for opinions, listened, truly listened, and she answered with the sharp clarity of someone who had lived on the other side of the system. and knew exactly where its flaws were. Together, they were an unlikely but effective alliance. He had the power. She had the perspective. Both had determination. Amira came to visit 3 times during those months. With each visit, she was different, more confident, more self-aware. Last time, she had brought her own notebook. She had started to write as well. Poetry about freedom, about choice, about sisters who open paths so others can walk them. Layla's mother had never come, but she had sent a letter, a single sentence. "I didn't know how to do what you are doing, but I'm glad someone did." It was the closest to approval Layla would receive, and it was enough. Her father never spoke to her again, but he hadn't tried to pull her back either. Maybe out of shame, maybe out of fear, maybe because he had finally understood that the daughter he had sold was no longer merchandise. She was a person, and people could not be bought back. On a scorching summer afternoon, Layla was in the garden when Khalid found her. He sat beside her in the shade of the palm tree. They stayed quiet for a while. The silence was comfortable now. They didn't need to fill every second with words. Finally, he spoke. "Rashad resigned today." Layla looked at him surprised. Why? Because he realized he lost, that the world is changing and he can either adapt or become irrelevant. He chose to leave with dignity. So it's a victory then. Khalid shook his head. It's progress. Victory would be if we didn't have to fight, but for now, progress will do. Layla looked back at the garden, at the flowers growing where they shouldn't grow, at the beauty that existed despite the desert, not because of it. 6 months ago, I was in that room waiting for the worst, thinking I had lost everything, thinking that choice always led to destruction. And now I know that choice leads to transformation. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it costs, but it's always worth it. Khalid took her hand, interlaced their fingers. It was a simple gesture, but it carried everything they had built. "I love you," he said. "I don't know if I've ever said that to you out loud, but it's true. I love you not for who I hoped you would be, but for who you are, for who you've taught me to be." Layla squeezed his hand back. She felt something warm and solid settle in her chest. It wasn't the fairy tale love that Amira dreamed of. It wasn't the poetry love Khalid read about. It was something more real, more complex, harder earned. It was the love born from shared struggle, from earned respect, from the choice renewed each day. "I love you too," she said. "Not because he saved me, but because he saw me when I was getting lost. Because he chose to wake up when it was easier to sleep. Because every day he chooses again." They stayed there as the sun sank below the horizon, as the shadows stretched, as the palace prepared for the night. And for the first time since she had arrived there, Layla didn't feel the walls as a prison. She felt them as space, as possibility, as a beginning instead of an end. That night they returned to their chambers together, not out of obligation, not because anyone was expecting them, simply because they chose to. And in that choice was all the difference. Layla picked up her notebook before bed. She wrote the last entry of that chapter. It wasn't elaborate poetry. It wasn't flowery prose. It was just simple truth. "Finally, I saw myself. And in seeing myself, I learned to see the world. And in seeing the world, I realized I could change it. Not alone, not all at once, but step by step, choice by choice, day by day. I didn't need to be loved in order to exist, but I learned that being seen is the first form of true love. And once someone sees us completely, we never go back to being invisible." This is my story. It doesn't have a happy ending in the traditional sense. It doesn't end with everything solved. It ends with everything possible. And possibility, I discovered, is much more valuable than perfection. Because perfection is static. Possibility is alive. And life, even when it hurts, is always worth living fully. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, lay down beside Khalid, who was already asleep. And for the first time in months, maybe years, maybe her whole life, Layla slept in peace. Not because all her problems were solved, but because she was finally living instead of just surviving. And that was more than enough. It was everything.